Okay, so we are Ve'etchanan, second portion of the fifth book, and Ve'etchanan has the basic concepts of Judaism are in this parsha. So there's not a lot of drama. Well, there is drama, but there's the basic that there's a lot of not a lot of plot. There's repetition of the major stories, and there's the major principles of Judaism. What are the major principles? The repetition of the Ten Commandments and the Shema. Hashem is one. But then there are verses that in this parsha that are actually more radical than saying Hashem Echad, God is one. And we study Hasidus, so we know that this is a very important premise in Hasidic philosophy from the Baal Shem Tov and Rabbi and the Alter Rebbe. And it's much more than just God is one, because God is one could mean many different things. But here in the Torah, in a way, when Moshe is giving his own speech, in a way he's saying things very in a way more radical, certainly with the Hasidic interpretation, and that is also verses that we say in the prayer when we open the ark, and prepare to open the ark, and then every day in the Aleinu 3 times a day, and that is essentially that the Hashem is Hashem Hu Elokim, the Lord is God. Ein od. Ein od means nothing else. Nothing else. So one means one, but God is one. Okay, so there are no two gods, right? One, again, like I said, one has multiple meanings. But ein od, nothing else means there's nothing else. Now, the simple interpretation is the Lord is God, Hashem is the God, and this ein od means no other God, right? That's how you could, if you want to interpret the verse that way, you could. But the literal reading is ein od, there's nothing else. And this becomes a premise of the Hasidic movement. I would say the foundational teaching of Hasidism taught by the Baal Shem Tov is Achdut Hashem, the unity of God, and the unity of God meaning that there's only God. Nothing else exists. What do I mean nothing else exists? Nothing else exists outside of Hashem. So if nothing else exists outside of Hashem, there's nothing else. There's nothing outside of him. Ain't od, there's nothing additional. Literally, od means additional. There's nothing additional. Additional means there's God and there's something else. There's nothing else. But what about creation? Creation is an extension of him. And that's the big premise of Hasidism, of Achdut Hashem, the unity of God. God is everywhere. There's nothing outside of Hashem. And we once studied the second section of Tanya, Shara Yichud Ve'amunah, the gate of unity and faith, that focuses on this concept and tries to explain it logically. And there's the upper unity and lower unity. We did 12 chapters on that. This talk of the Rebbe, in a way, is also an analysis of the Tanya of the second section and adds a very important detail. But I don't know if we'll get to the whole essay. Even the first section itself, first section of the essay, is also a standalone point. And it's consistent with the idea that that Hasidism always talks about, is that there are essentially two perspectives. There's the perspective of the divine. Perspective of the divine is Yehuda Ilah, higher unity. Higher unity means the only thing that exists is godliness. Why? Because the creation is insignificant. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's so insignificant, it doesn't catch your attention. And the Tanya brings the metaphors. If you have the ray of the sun in the sun, right? So if you're sitting in a dark room and there's a little crack in your window, a little crack in your wall, and the ray of the sun enters the room, wow, the ray of the sun is so beautiful and so profound and so powerful to light up a room. But if you trace that ray back 90 million miles and you go back to the sun, it's not that long. It only takes 8 minutes to get there. But okay, you trace it back, and now that ray is in the sun. You're not going to say, wow, what a powerful ray. The ray is insignificant. It's there. Scientifically, it's there. The energy is there, but it doesn't mean anything. It's insignificant. You can't say, oh, by the way, within the globe of the sun, we have the sun and we also have the ray. No, the ray is the ray. The ray is included and subsumed within its source. And if you have that, from Hashem's perspective, all of creation is the ray of the sun in the sun. It's insignificant. The Yehuda Tata, the lower unity, is our perspective. And our perspective is that the world exists. It's the ray of the sun outside the sun. But we know that we're just the ray, we're just an extension. And without the ray, without the source constantly giving us life, we would cease to exist. So in that sense, we're not outside of him. But in our perspective, we're very significant. And the the world is a significant place. It's just that it's also included in the unity because the divine present, because Hashem, the divine energy, is creating it. So we don't have an independent existence. So we're so we're an extension of godliness. So that's basically the two levels: the higher unity, lower unity, and both are true. Who's right is a very fascinating question. Who's right? I would say, I would say the old model is we're both right, but God is more right. As you go through the 7 generations of Hasidic philosophy and you come to the Rebbe, it becomes more tricky to say who's right. And maybe they're both just as right, but that's a subject for itself. That takes time to get into. But but we can understand this, that in a relationship there are two perspectives, both are legitimate, both are different, both are legitimate, and we each can respect the other's relationship. And that's true. Now, you also have to try to understand the other perspective. So when we cover our eyes and we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, God is one, meaning there's nothing else. We're covering our eyes, we're blocking our own perspective, and we're accepting that the person we're in a relationship with has that perspective, and we want to feel it for at least for a moment. Then we open up our eyes and say, what's our perspective? Our perspective is different. Blessed be the glory of his name. Baruch Shem Kol Nachoto. Blessed be the name of the glory of his kingship forever. Kingship means something else. If God's a king, there's a kingdom. If God's a king, there's people to rule. If God's a king, there's a universe, right? That's the second level. By the way, that's not in the Torah. The sages added that because the sages say, okay, God's perspective is very nice, but what about our perspective? Okay, so we put in that verse, and the Zohar, Tanya quotes the Zohar that says the first verse is higher unity, the second verse is lower unity. So that's a well-standing idea. You know this because you've studied the Tanya, second section, and this is basic. This is fundamental Hasidic ideas. What's going to happen in this first section is the Rebbe is going to show two verses and show how one verse represents the higher unity and the other verse represents the lower unity. And then that's only the first thing. Then there's the whole sikha, the whole essay continues about something else, being clothed. Maybe we could talk about it next week. Maybe that's actually maybe a good thing because next week we'll do it's also about the Shema in a way. So maybe we'll talk about it next week. But let's start with the first section and showing how these two perspectives are represented in two verses that sound similar, but they're different. And again, the takeaway is, of course, that our perspective is legitimate. Hashem's perspective is legitimate. But if you want to also be in a relationship, it's not enough to be only within your perspective. You also have to try to feel the other person's perspective, and not fear that trying to appreciate the other person's perspective means that you have to give up your own perspective. I personally think that that's why people refuse to see another perspective, because they're afraid that if your perspective is legitimate, that means I'm compromising my perspective. If I see the situation through your eyes, then I'm not allowing myself to see my side of the story. And the Kabbalistic model is no, it's not a contradiction. You could see the other perspective while maintaining your own perspective, and you can have that. Your brain is broad enough to be able to hold both those truths, if not at the same second, then subsequently. So don't be afraid that having Hashem's perspective, that there's nothing in this world that's significant except for Hashem. Don't be afraid that's going to mean that you can't compromise. You have to compromise your perspective, which is lower unity, which is there is reality in this world, but the reality is dependent and gets life and gets its existence from Hashem. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think this is a very important point, but I don't think that a lot of people in our world are aware of the high unity of that concept.
Correct. I was saying in human relationships. Let's say in a human relationship, you have to have the same thing. You have to, if you're in a relation, if it's just my perspective, then I'm not in a relationship. I may live in the same house. We may file taxes as married. We may do a lot of good things. We may chip in for the rent. We may do a lot of good things, but we're not really married because my perspective is different than your perspective. And I don't allow for anyone else's perspective to be significant. Entering a relationship with a spouse or with children or parents doesn't really matter. Entering a perspective means I have to acknowledge that you have a perspective. Now, people would rather be lived together for 60 years or 70 years than acknowledge that the other person's perspective is significant. Why? Because then they think that means that I have to give up mine. Right? You say you were hurt. I say I didn't mean to hurt you. Who's right? Right? So if I acknowledge that you were hurt, then that means that I meant to hurt you. No, it's fine. It's fine. Your perspective is significant. My perspective is significant. Even if I can't keep them at the same second, I can keep them one after the other. And my reality is not going to crumble if just because I acknowledge your reality.
Right, but that's if the person recognized the existence of the higher unity,
Yeah.
then it's easier to understand the.
Correct.
Yeah, it's not because your brain is trained. Brain can, because I'm like a music teacher. I know how students behave when you try to play a duet. So
Yeah.
they don't listen to each other. A lot of times they don't listen to each other. But if they're not aware if there is another person playing his or her part, it's not gonna sound good. So,
Yeah.
so the brain is trained to hear.
Agreed.
So
Excellent point. Excellent point. Excellent point.
harmony in music, the brain is capable of doing. You can read a score with hundreds of instruments there at the same time.
Right.
So if you conceptually accept that there is a higher unity, then you let your brain
Right. Beautiful.
you know
Beautifully said that. And then it's not a threat, but then it's not a threat. Then it's harmony, right?
right.
Because you can look at it and say, I'm seeing one thing. You know, Rabbi Jacobson says, he says that if I'm talking and someone else starts talking, it's a disturbance. But if I'm singing and someone else starts singing, it's harmony, right? So how are you taking the other person's perspective? You could take it as a threat, but if you understand that there are multiple perspectives and they could, even before they could, Vicky, here's the next step, they can enhance each other. I'm saying even before, just that they exist, and you're saying that as well. You're saying you'll be better off by acknowledging that there's something else. Agreed. Very beautiful. Okay, well, how does this tie back to the verse? Because basically there's two verses. One verse says there's nothing else, and the other verse says, in the heavens above and the earth below, there's nothing else. So one verse doesn't mention heaven and earth. It's not getting into the specifics. The world is not significant enough. The creation is not significant enough to start talking about heaven and earth, because everything is insignificant. It's the ray of the sun and the sun. You're going to talk about what does the ray contain, the details of the ray. It's not relevant from the upper unity. Lower unity, there's heaven, there's earth, there's distinction, there's separation, there's creation, there are differences within creation. And all of that is not outside of Hashem. That's the lower unity. So I just gave you the whole thing, but we'll read it inside because it's really beautiful, I think. Okay. Here, I think we shared it. Yes, here we go. In this week's Torah reading contains two verses whose focus is our faith in God's unity and the knowledge that God, Havaya, is the Lord Elohim, which is its own subject, which is that Elohim is the name of concealment and Hashem is the name of revelation, and the concealment and the revelation are one, which is basically saying that even where you don't see the presence of God because of Elohim, that itself is not separate from Hashem because it's Hashem's power to conceal. So what are the two verses? You were shown the revelation at Sinai so that you will know that God is the Lord. There is nothing aside from him. That's what we see at Sinai. And you'll see there, the Rebbe says, the Rebbe leads this to this idea that at Sinai, we didn't see anything. We didn't see our perspective, right? Sinai, we didn't see distinction between heaven and earth. All we see is God's perspective, okay? And that's why it says you have been shown to know, right? You have been shown, you've been shown. Hashem shows us his perspective. So that's one verse. The next verse is, and know this day, and I'm giving you the spoiler, know this day means you have to know, you have to think, you have to meditate. So this is the human perspective, right? So know this day and take it to your heart that God is the Lord in the heavens above and upon the earth below, there is nothing else. So here there's already a distinction between heaven and earth. But so the first verse states that God is the Lord without further elaboration. While the second verse adds details. God is the Lord in the heavens above and upon the earth below. Simply put, the difference between these two verses can be explained as follows. And simply put, the whole rest of the essay is going to say there's deeper levels, but we're not focusing on the deeper levels. We want to focus on the simple interpretation, because even the simple interpretation is not so simple. It's just as straightforward. It's the surface. It's the first level. So so we're not going to focus on the few other interpretations. We're going to focus just on this, and this is a beautiful idea. According to the straightforward interpretation, the first verse, you were shown to so that you will know, speaks about the revelation to the Jews at the giving of the Torah. You have been shown to know. Moshe is introducing the story of the giving of the Torah, talking about the revelation at Sinai. And he actually dramatizes it. That's why in the beginning, when I said there's no drama, I took that back, because there's a tremendous amount of drama. because sometimes people go do something and they don't realize, they take it for granted. So Moshe, what he's doing here is telling people, wake up. This event is a massive event. This is radical. This has never happened before. So Moshe is dramatizing Sinai. But in any case, the point is that you have been shown to know, refers to Sinai. It speaks about the revelation to the Jews at the giving of the Torah. At that time, God revealed himself to the Jewish people, and they saw that he is the only one. Quote. Where is this quote from? This comes from Rashi, quotes the Medrash. Okay. The Jewish people saw his absolute oneness as he perceives it. In other words, at Sinai, we've been shown to know. What have we been shown to know? We've been shown to know God's perspective. From that standpoint, there's no difference between heaven and earth. For in relation to his absolute oneness, all existence is equally inconsequential. Therefore, it would be inappropriate for the verse to specify that his oneness exists in the heavens above and the earth below. Because from Hashem's perspective, all there is Hashem's oneness. The rest of the world is inconsequential. And the inconsequentialness of heaven and earth is the same. Compared to his greatness, it's all the same. Earth and the vastness of space is all the same. It's all equally insignificant or inconsequential. By contrast, know this day and take it to your heart is a command to man, right? You have to look at the context of the verse. Know today, v'yadaita. We say it in Aleinu every day, the final prayer, 3 times a day. V'yadaita, you should know. You should know means you should meditate. This is a commandment to the person. He is charged with laboring to understand, to know, and to take to heart. That's what it says right after v'yadaita. You should know to take to heart. And that's the Hasidic idea, certainly Chabad, that Chabad is not enough. Just to understand, wisdom, understanding, knowledge is not enough. It's v'yadaita. The purpose of knowledge is so the parents, the mother and the father, the Chachma and the Bina, give birth to the emotions of the heart. And the emotions of the heart are the children. So you should know and take it to your heart. This is a person's labor, a person's meditation, to know and take to his heart that God is the Lord. Thus, this verse is speaking about knowledge and awareness of God's unity that stems from man's intellectual labor and from man's perspective, man's intellectual labor. There should be a comma. And from man's perspective, there is a difference between heaven and earth. From that standpoint, recognizing the expression of his oneness in all the many individual levels of existence in the heavens and earth, and the heavens above and the earth below, involves distinctly different dimensions of knowledge, right? So the human perspective, of course we perceive difference. Of course we perceive a multiplicity and plurality, and heavens is different than earth. One is greater, one's more vast, one is more elevated, earth is more physical and corporal. The bottom line is, from our perspectives, there are differences. These distinctions are reflected in the comment of the Medrash on the verse, know this day. It's a beautiful Medrash that describes how different people showed up, non-Jewish people, for the most part, 3 non-Jewish people, and then Moshe, and each recognized that Hashem exists, but not everywhere. Each one has Hashem in one domain. And finally, Moshe says, no, God is in all these domains. So let's start. Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, when he comes to the Jewish people, attributed substance to false deities, saying, now I know that God is greater than all other gods. The implication is that they are also great. However, he is greater than they. Matnot kuna. So that's the commentary on the Medrash. So Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law, says he recognizes God. But is God everywhere? No, there are many other gods. Okay, God is greater, right? So basically placing him in a way in heaven. Because God is greater means God is the top of the hierarchy. And then there's many other gods ultimately controlling this world. So that basically raises God up. Naaman is a character in the book of Judges. The book of Kings. And he's he's a king, Ammonite king. And there's a long story in the Bible how Elisha cures him from his leprosy. In any case, Naaman acknowledges God's oneness to a certain extent, saying, behold, I have come to the awareness that there is no God on earth other than the God of Israel. Thus, he acknowledged God's uniqueness on earth, but not in heaven. Okay, so each one, Yisrael understands God is in heaven. Naaman understands God's on earth. Rachav, who's Rachav? Rachav is the woman who, when Joshua sends prophet spies to scout the city of Jericho, they end up in her house, and she hides them and protects them and gives them the whole scoop of what they had to know, how the people are afraid. In any case, Rachav placed him, meaning God, in both heaven and earth, saying, God, your Lord, is the Lord in the heavens above and upon the earth below. She acknowledges God's presence not only on earth, but also in heavens, which are not apparent to your eyes. However, she made no mention of God's presence in the empty space where the world, both heaven and earth, exists. Moshe placed him even in the empty space where the world exists, saying that God is the Lord in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is nothing else. What is meant by there is nothing else? God is the Lord even in the empty space where the world exists. Halal Shalom means in the empty space. Later on in the talk, the Rebbe says empty space is unholiness, but that's for a different story. The bottom line is that from our what this Medrash shows is that it's not a simple matter, because from the human perspective, for some people it's easier to recognize God in heaven. Other people are not spiritual, they're not philosophers, and they don't understand theology, but they understand God on earth. If the prophet cures a leprosy, now they understand God's on earth, right? But it's a different skill set to be able to sense God in heaven or God on earth, right? It depends on your perspective. Rachav could say God isn't above, he's below, but is he really everywhere? Is he in the absent empty space? She doesn't see that. Moshe says he's everywhere. Okay. In other words, the knowledge that God is the Lord, which comes through man's effort and comprehension, is divided into three general categories: in the heavens above, upon the earth below, and there is nothing else, i.e., even the empty space where the world exists. So that's from our perspective. Now, I just want to conclude, because I said we'll conclude next week, but I'm just going to jump and give the spoiler in case we don't finish next week, that later the Rebbe is going to come back and explain how these three different levels could apply to a person's own life. Because you have the soul, the way the soul is in heaven. Then you have the soul, the way it's on earth. So the soul comes into the physical space and in the physical world, but the soul is still engaged in holiness. Person studying Torah, person's doing a mitzvah, person is praying. It's not the soul in heaven. It's not God in heaven. It's God on earth. But in the earth, we're still in the realm of holiness. And then there's the soul on earth, the way the soul is involved in worldly matters. You're outside in the world in the neutral space, meaning in the empty space. It's not a sin, but it's not a mitzvah. Now your job is to bring God not only to the soul the way it was in heaven, not only when you're involved and doing mitzvot in the physical world, but when you are out taking care of your own mundane matters, where in a way it's empty space because the Torah is not telling you what to do, but you have to recognize that God is there as well and bring the holiness there as well. But all that is the human perspective, because from Hashem it's all the same. Our perspective, there's differences, and each are important, and each has a step, and you have to go from step 1 to 2 to 3, and that's the human perspective. So I think there's a lot more to say, of course, about this. This is the most fundamental Hasidic concepts, but I think it's enough to give a taste, and then we can revisit.